My name is Suleiman Njotea. I just would like to welcome you to this festival. I'm the founder of the Asmara Addis Literary Festival in Exile. This is our third edition, and I will say something that I said yesterday, which I'll keep saying it every day, because it's exactly why I'm doing this. You know, I'm a writer, I'm a novelist, and I keep telling people I'd rather write than do festivals, because like most writers, I prefer isolation and I prefer to stay with my characters. But but I love literature, I love ideas, I love art, and I know all this is cliche until you come to realize that for many of us who come from the so-called margins, don't always have the opportunity to be ourselves, and don't always have the opportunity to shine the way we are. So this is incredibly important to me, to provide a platform for people like myself who come from certain backgrounds, but also from all the communities, so we can meet at a place as equal and we talk about the thing that matters to us all. I have to say, organizing literary festivals in times like this isn't easy. So I'd like again to thank you for coming. I know a lot of people are finding it very difficult to come out after the pandemics, and I totally understand. So I appreciate you being here. But also, this festival would not have been possible without the support of our partners, and there are many of them. But today I would like to highlight this place, Passaporta, and in particular Elka. I would like to thank Elka for her support to me throughout the years. I'm also a founder of something called the Creative Writing Academy for Refugees, and this year, for instance, Passaporta was the co-founder of this masterclass that we did, and all the students performed yesterday, and it was amazing. I really love it, and I want to thank Elka for continuing to support the vision that we have. And she's always like, bring me a vision and I'll do what I can to support you, and I want to thank you for that. And also, this panel is sponsored by Passaporta, and so Passaporta are one of our partners. And please remember that this is just the second day of the festival. So after this, we're gonna go to Flagey Square, and we're gonna have a linguistic parade where we're gonna have performances in about 8 different languages spoken in Brussels, leading us all the way to Molière Theatre, where we'll have the rest of the evening. So come, tell your friends, and please buy our artist books. And tomorrow as well, we have the final day. I'll leave you now to these magnificent people. I just want to say thank you so much to each and every one of you for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Suleiman. Welcome everyone from our part as well, here at the Asmara Addis Literary Festival in Exile, also here in Passaporta, the International House of Literature in Brussels. No better place to have a talk on inclusivity and storytelling in the literary world. In the next hour or so, we will be discussing why changes at the top, at the editorial side of publishing houses, but also festival organizers and award juries and so on, are necessary for more representative stories and more diverse authors. And when I say we, I mean myself, but also, and more importantly, Dalilla Hermans, Ébissé Wakjira-Rouw, and Jessica Craig. Dalilla is an author, a playwright, a journalist, and co-host of the hugely interesting podcast Keihard, and many other things. Ébissé is a publications and content coordinator at Frame of Framed, editor for the Nederlandse Boekengids, the Dutch review of books, and co-founder of the popular Dutch podcast Dipsaus. Represent. And Jessica is a literary agent and founder of Craig Literary, who represents diverse writers worldwide. Welcome to all three of you. Thanks so much for being here, for taking the time to talk with each other and with us about why being in charge of storytelling matters. Dalilla and Ébissé, I'm going to ask you, slightly superficial question maybe to start with. How diverse is the literary landscape in Belgium and the Netherlands?
Well,
Very long answer. It isn't.
the fact that everyone immediately left explains it all. I think for me, like I'll focus on the Flemish part of Belgium. I think we can safely say that it's really not diverse at all. There's starting to be small changes, but it's largely run by middle class or highly educated white people who are straight and who, it's really the profile of most authors, and not only the authors but also the editors, the publishing houses, the whole literary world is just not diverse at all.
Same story in the Netherlands?
No, I think the Netherlands. I was just, when we were having our talk upstairs, I always told her, like, when every time I speak to Belgians, I always think, it's better in the Netherlands compared to Belgium. I know how dire the situation is in Belgium. I feel you. I understand what you're going through. But I must say, I mean, in the Netherlands, things, since I started out in the publishing world, things have definitely changed. There is improvement, but it's like baby steps, and it's in terms of what is considered diverse in the Netherlands, like the output, so that you have more people of color or from the LGBTQI community on your list. But the people who actually who produce literature, the gatekeepers, it's just it is what it is. And there's like one or two people that have, how do you say, are being part of the literary publishing world, but it's the same old.
And is it, Jessica, is it exemplary, the situation here in the Low Countries, let's say, for the way things are in the international context, would you say?
Well, I can, most of my knowledge is about the US and the UK, and actually, compared to my impression of European countries or here, it is more positive there. Like, there are more changes, more diversification that's happened over the past few years, and some big hires, like at the in the big publishing houses in the US and UK, and agencies as well. I mean, there's a lot of diversity now there, I think, especially in the US, but also some important changes in the UK. But I think it's more now, I'm constantly being aware of how much more work there is to do, or just how, I guess, more nuanced work there is to do. Like, there's a lot of, like, I don't know, kind of performative changes, or like celebrity publishing, or so yeah, I think we need to really just keep like pushing into the details over a much longer span of time.
But I hear that in the US, if I am quoting you correctly, there are changes, positive changes at the at the creative side, the people doing the creative work, and also at the editors or publishers side, and that's maybe where most of the work here is still to be done.
I mean, there is definitely there have been, especially in big literary agencies as well as publishing houses, there have been quite, like you said, big hires at editorial, executive editorial level, whereas in the Netherlands,
nothing.
Same old, nothing. There's nothing. I haven't seen any changes for the past, I don't know, 15, 20 years since I've been in the publishing world. So, and I do, but there is this awareness in the Netherlands that they can't, the excuses that has been used for, I don't know how many, like we can't find them, that they can't say that anymore. It's just like, it has that kind of excuse, you don't hear it anymore. But in terms of who gets to be signed and who doesn't, there's still a lot of work to do. At some point you see the way, because it's also, at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, publishing is a capitalist industry. So you have to look at your sales Do you like return on investment? So you tend to start publishing certain types of voices which you know are going to be successful. That's also what's happening in the US, especially after Black Lives Matter. It's like the amount of books that I get to it's like all the same in it's about.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be like the pessimist on this panel, but you saying like that the excuse we can't find them isn't being used in the Netherlands anymore, I still get that all the time. I still get a lot of questions from publishers when they're looking for people of color, while that's not my job, or and I also feel like what seems to be happening, which worries me a little bit, is that now they realize, okay, we need to have more diverse books, so they're starting to translate books. But that's super frustrating because there's so many stories right here. There's so many, especially after Black Lives Matter. I got a few questions, people asking me to translate. I did one because I thought it was interesting, but a lot of these books that I really replied saying, why aren't you asking me to write about this? Because that's what I do. Why are you asking me to translate someone in the US to write about Black Lives Matter there, while there's this whole movement and this whole very specific story happening here? And it didn't cross their mind. It's not even a malicious thing. It's just, no.
So what's the problem then if it's not a question of we can't find them?
I think it's also, again, like I said, you want to make money. For example, I can give 2 examples of books that were I think maybe they paid 30,000 euros for the rights of Amanda Gorman's book, and with 30,000 euros, how many writers in the Netherlands can you help? There's a lot of spoken word artists in the Netherlands that you can actually help. You can help them get a get a foothold within the publishing industry, but they would rather pay 30,000 euros or 25,000, I don't know, a lot of money for the rights of Amanda. So it's good on your list. It's list building, it's prestige, and it doesn't necessarily do anything for the Dutch literary market at all. It's nice that she got translated, but what does it do for us? Nothing. Nothing at all.
And is it too
because
big of a risk? Do they see it maybe as too big of a risk?
Yeah, I think they don't know that they actually exist. These people, they don't have the network to know who's good and who isn't. And secondly, I think they do think it's I think they might also think it's too big of a risk, or they don't want to be involved in the whole activist critical side of things. Yeah. People are scared of that as well. Yes. And yeah, actually, it's very difficult for me to talk because actually you should ask them. I don't know. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. Every time somebody asks me what is your opinion, I'm like, what do you ask? Why don't you ask the actual publishers and editors who are making these decisions? Let's sit and have this conversation. But they don't. They don't want to be. They're not part of the conversation. It's always the writers or activists who are asked to talk about it, and the publishers themselves, they always keep themselves outside of the media, I think. So I would like to have that conversation.
I've had it a few times with publishers, but more about my own work, for example. And one of the things that I've noticed that the reason why they think it's a risk is because they don't know the market. Mm-hmm. So they keep a lot of my books undersold because they were promoted to the wrong audience, because they don't know where my audience is. So it's also like the risk that they are calculating is a risk not based in fact. No. So yeah, like it's stuff like that. So I can see why it would be like, ooh, I don't know if we should invest in this young writer because you don't know the market and how much these stories are needed and wanted. And so I've had it happen a few times that, for example, I wrote a children's book, and I think at least 3 times it was sold out everywhere, and people were selling it on the black, for 65 euros for a little children's book. And I had to call my publisher and say it's happening again. And then they waited 2-3 months before they reprinted it, because they're always afraid maybe that's just a hype, maybe that's because you're on TV. And I'm like, no, it's because the story is how much more clear can it be? So there's this fear of not selling or not being, but it's a fear that's based on their own knowledge of the world. They're like, yeah, but my friends wouldn't buy this book, so it won't sell, and that's backwards.
And also it's also lazy. It's easy.
Yeah.
It's easier to translate a famous book or a book that's big in the UK or the US, because it's also following hypes is also a thing in the you know how the bidding wars. I think it's easier to do that and say, hey, look, we have a diverse writer.
Yeah.
That we translated, like Fanon or whatever, than actually saying, okay, let's look for Dutch and Flemish thinkers.
Yeah. But so it's not a single issue problem. It's like a multifaceted problem that is, rooted in the whole system, basically. And that's maybe why we need these changes in all the different departments and in all the layers of the publishing world. Jessica, you represent diverse writers, let's say. How do you work to get your writers a seat at the table?
Right. I work very hard. I mean, it's like, just because I'm a gatekeeper with like decades of experience. I mean, I think that's been one of the maybe most shocking things to me, and especially in the past few years when there are clearly like new doors opening, and yet for new voices, for writers that are, pushing against the tide somehow, or like doing something that hasn't been written in this way before, it's incredibly hard. I mean, and yet it's, it's enormously satisfying when you do get through and like have a victory. But it's, I think it's something that I've never once wanted to stop or like do different kinds of writers, because like that would be easier. And yet it makes me realize just how entrenched this. I mean, and I don't think it's not only racism. It's sexism. It's ageism. It's elitism. And they all like. I mean, any editor that you're submitting to is, I think, influenced by, some of those factors more than others, but it's always a combination of those things. And I think what you've pointed out about this gap between the sort of, I call it tunnel vision, actually, the sort of tunnels that the the editors or the publishers are in, versus what's happening like out in the world and in communities and with writers. And that keeps appearing in a very pronounced way to me. Like, one of my writers who's like part of the festival here, Lola, her debut novel, In Every Mirror She's Black, we went through more than 70 rejections. In both the US and UK combined, but still, for this novel that, I knew from the first moment that I read it, there was an audience for this. This is like a page turner. These are like women characters that need to be centered in a book, and the author like had an incredible platform, actually. Compared to most other debut writers, and yet there was just this constant like disconnect of editors saying, we don't know how to market this, or like who would the audience be, or we can't connect with the characters. And yet as soon as it was published, it just keeps connecting over and over again. So.
And how do you react to those reactions by publishers? It's always, I can never really react. There were a couple examples actually where I did push back more than I ever have before, like just saying, I think you're wrong, or like, do you realize what you're saying here? Yeah. But in most cases, you just move on, and like you have to find the person that's going to connect with the book. So it doesn't matter, like, if I was to,
say what I really thought about what they were saying, it wouldn't help the project of getting the book published.
And have you noticed a change or a slight evolution in the past year since you've been active?
I think so, but it's still very challenging. I mean, it's in some ways I think it's getting harder and harder for original new voices to break through because there's I don't know, so much noise like in the world, in the publishing industry, like people
and also what I noticed in the also post,
and it's also about resources, where are they putting the most in money and support?
And I think the without, I don't want to name names, but there were a couple of book titles in the UK and also on the US market that I saw. I was like, why is there's a certain book or writer that you have like the whole marketing machine being thrown at it, and then I read the book and I'm like, why, you know? So there's also this whole idea of like hypes, so that you can. So I think it might even have become more tough on the UK and US market because there's a lot of noise, as you said.
Ébissé, let's talk a bit about what you do. Well, one of the things you did
one of the many
was compile the book Zwart, a collection of Afro-European literature from Dutch and Belgian Flemish writers, to which Dalilla made a contribution, I think.
Yes.
What was the reasoning behind that initiative?
It was actually, I mean, I always would love to pretend that it was my original idea, but it was actually, you know, Mitsi van der Pluim, from former head of Atlas Contact, who now has her own publishing house, who came up with that idea and told Jessica she's Jessica Nash, who's an editor, another Jessica, a different Jessica. Yeah, of course you know her. And she told Jessica, go to Ébissé and ask her to compile. I'm like, I don't do any. I was like, no. My first instinct was like, but I don't want my name on a book. I just help others. You know, I was working as an editor at a university press, Amsterdam University Press. But then we went through a whole process of compiling Black African writing, but then while we were trying to narrow down the list, it was going to be international. Also, we were also thinking of doing translations. While we were discussing it with Jessica, Mitsi walked in and she just looked and she said, "Why don't you just do Dutch writers?" And then I was like, that makes it much easier, because if you look at the Dutch literary scene, I'm not sure. I mean, because of the migration history of Belgium and the Netherlands is different. If you look at Black writing in the Netherlands, it's mostly Afro-Caribbean because of the colonial history of the Netherlands. And there were hardly any continental African writers that have been, there were like a few of them which I knew of. And then, so one of them was Van Basherif, who has been translated in, I don't know, over 25 languages. He's a really great writer. So I asked him to help me out with compiling the list, and we just asked our friends who writes, and somebody said they said you have to have Dalilla, and then that's how we kind of suddenly I could find them. You know, it was easy. It was that easy. And when it came out, because it was an anthology, usually anthologies don't really sell in the Netherlands. You know, it's like you're doing it for the culture, not for the profits. And we didn't expect it to sell more than 600 maybe copies, but because most of us operate on the margins, we have found our own way of getting our message out there, because of our own network and social media. I think it's been over maybe by now 5,000 copies. So it's been quite well, and we had like a blanket media coverage because it was black, and oh my God, who are these people? And then there's of course
We hated the whole press. The press tour.
There was also a lot of drama, of course, involved. I don't know the situation in the Netherlands and in Belgium is like the moment Black people do something, then other people feel the need to pushback. So there was a lot of negativity as well.
There's a lot of that as well in the US and UK, unfortunately.
It takes some courage to tell these stories and to take the space to tell these stories. The subtitle of this conversation is "Being in charge of why being in charge of storytelling matters." What does that mean to you, being in charge of storytelling or of your own stories?
Well, I think for me it's been a process because, like most people of color in Belgium who write, I started as an activist and I started as an opinion writer, but I lost interest in that really soon because it's not fun, and it's a little dangerous, and it's very tiring. So I decided early on, like I want to do it a different way. Like I still want to tell the stories, I still want to tell my stories, but I want to do it a different way. And it was so weird how I wasn't allowed to. Every time I tried to send in something that wasn't about the narrow topic, like anti-racism, anti-black, every time I tried to do something else, people would just try to push me back into that. And so I think for me, I had to retreat a little bit. I'm gonna self-publish for the first time, like my next children's book, because of everything that happened with the first one. I found my people, like you, that I want to work with. But I feel like if all of that trying to put me back into this position of being like this one-trick pony, sort of, if that wasn't the case, if I was allowed to be free in what I do, I think I would have written more books by now. That's the thing. Like it actively stopped me from writing, and I started doing other things, and I really had to like get out of that world because it was so frustrating. And like one of the things a publisher once told me, like one of my last, I think, we also made an anthology together, but my last book that I wrote myself, it was just a collection of essays, and it was on anti-racism, but I wrote it for the newspaper, and I just decided, let's just turn it into a book, and just, like, it was sort of a message. The title was literally "The Last Thing I Want to Say About Racism." That's the title, so it's kind of on the nose, and then that was, it was very, very successful, so that's what a publisher, when I pitched a new idea, told me, but don't you see that your biggest success lies in that topic? And I'm like, no, it's because that was promoted by everyone, and it happened. I published that book 2 weeks before George Floyd died. Like that, it wasn't. It's not my best work. I feel it's not the book I'm proudest of, and it was just such a frustrating conversation that it really put me off of writing for a while. So I feel like I can't stress enough how important like getting to tell your own stories is.
Does that resonate?
Yeah, definitely, because I think one of the things that we realized early on is that because of the way the industry is made up, it's kind of difficult to, everybody said like start your own publishing house. They have no idea what that entails the whole chain of production. So what we did was, while I was still working at the other publishing house, we started our podcast with two of my friends, Mariam and Anusha. Anusha is also who is a best-selling writer. Who wrote about the Dutch version of Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race. That was 5-6 years ago? Yeah. And we started our own podcast, which is a talk show which we discuss some of these subjects, but also we talk about everything else, like, I don't know, Fenty Beauty and Rihanna. It's not always, people think like we're always complaining, but we're not. We always have, we have fun. We always have fun. And but once, when it was Anusha who said at some point, like, what she's like, why don't we just start publishing our own books? So 4 years ago, with the podcast is called Dipsaus, and we do have English stuff as well, but mostly in Dutch. And I went to Mitzi. I talked to a lot of publishers, but then the easiest conversation I had from all the publishing houses that I spoke to was with the publisher who was whom I admired the most, and I was like frightened of her. She just scared the bejesus out of me. She's very intimidating, but it was the shortest and the most comfortable conversation that I had. And she says, "Let's do this." And so we started this partnership 3 years ago. So now I only publish books that I want to publish, and I don't have to deal with all the other noise. And it's a slow process. It's not like we don't have 10 books a year or something. We've published 3 under our own imprint now, and 3 more coming this year. I'm working with a lot of interesting writers, and I don't have to, like you said, I'm not interested in publishing another book about racism, because there are other publishing houses taking care of that at the moment as we speak, which is, I'm very glad that people are publishing, but I'm not interested in those kinds of stories anymore. I'm really interested in finding Dutch-speaking voices to amplify those voices, because again, when it comes to like Black writing or African writing, we also tend to look towards the largest market, which is the English language market, and everything gets translated, which is okay, but what about Dalilla? What about the Dalillas of this world? Why don't they get translated into English, for example? There's a one-way, it's usually a one-way conversation that we're having with the Anglo-American markets.
And this need to tell our own stories, is it here because, as I read on the Dipsaus website, many Dutch people of color think that the media do not adequately reflect our multicultural and diverse society?
Much.
And
yeah, I mean, is this going to be live? Okay, how open, how honest, allowed to be?
Just be.
Because it is, in a way, because like I said, it's a tiny market, there's not a lot of money, so certain type of voices, the palatable voices get opportunities. And after like a whole campaign, we now have a Black TV, what's an gender? Channel called Zwart, which it's called that, and it was he was quite successful. They really worked hard, and we finally have. They had to first have like 50,000 active members to even be considered, and they had their very first TV outsending. Help me. Broadcast that was on Friday, and I was disappointed because it was entertainment. It was music. I'm like, when will we not? You know, what if it's something? If it's either hip hop, R&B, or sports. When is it going to be something different? I understand, of course, they have to have a large viewership in order to continue to get funded. But then I'm like, okay, this can't be it. So I was planning on giving them feedback, because I know the owners very well. They're friends of mine. I love you, Okazi. If you're listening.
I was like, are you putting them on blast here?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. This is a loving criticism. But he has also specifically told me you have to be like give feedback. Yes. So this is my feedback.
No, but I think the media in Belgium, I'm a part of that. So I acknowledge, because I write for a large newspaper, and I have a very small but like little place there every other day. So that's my main gig, let's say. So I can't say that I haven't profited of the fact that I got a lot of media attention when I first started out. That helped me. That helped my career, definitely. But the things that I saw along the way have been almost traumatizing. Like it's real. It's a horrible world where there is, like, if I say that the publishing world and books isn't diverse, I think the media is 10 times worse in Belgium. It's really because they're actively against being diverse. It's really weird. There's such hierarchy also. So if you get too big, they have to put you. So, and it's also very political. So like it's a whole messy thing. And I do feel, because we are a super diverse society, especially if you look at the young ones here in Belgium. Sometimes we forget how diverse we are. I think like now it's almost 75% of children being born in the big cities have migration background. So 75%, that's not even, so we're a super diverse country. So the disconnect between the population and what we're seeing is insane. It's absolutely insane. And I feel like you kind of need the media to, you don't need them necessarily, but it helps if, for example, if certain stories are being told or if certain authors get platforms, that helps. So if that doesn't happen, then it's difficult for other worlds to be more diverse because the media holds so much power. As long as they're not telling the stories or they're not giving the platform, it's very difficult for, let's say, the literary worlds or education or wherever there's a lack of diversity. It's difficult to invent that if you don't see it. So that's like it's very frustrating to see the connection between the two. Because for example, when we did Zwart, I was one of the authors, and at that time I was sort of well known. I wouldn't say famous, but well known in the Flemish part because I'd done some things on TV. So there was this television show like on the national broadcasting channel, and we were the publishers were pushing, were talking to that program like, can we do an item about this book because it's an important book, it's historical. And so they said, yeah, okay, if Dalilla comes. But I couldn't do it that day. I don't remember why. I couldn't make it. So I said, no, I can't make it, but here are the names and the email addresses and the phone numbers of the 18 other authors in this book. And they just canceled the item. Yeah. So it's stuff like that happens all the time, and it happens especially to people of color in this country. It's that's actively pushing us down, like that's actively standing in our way and in the way of our growth. And then it's easy for publishers to say, yeah, but we don't know your market or there's no audience because we're being pushed down. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, and the consequences of that, of course, are that as was written or is written on the Dipsaus website, that people, audiences, viewers, and members of society don't see themselves reflected in those media and in those stories.
So they don't engage with these stories as well. I mean, most people now either stream stuff on Netflix or wherever than watch Dutch television.
Yeah,
I don't watch Dutch television. There's hardly anything for me on there.
Yeah, they're making themselves redundant by not doing this, and I think even publishers, not yet. But over time, if they don't diversify, I always say like it's not a nice to have; it's a necessity. You'll die out because the population is changing.
Dalilla, you wrote and directed two plays as well, Her, Here, and Us Now, which both very much put the black female experience forward. Let's say, why did you find that? Why did you feel the need so much to write those plays?
Well, the first one I have to admit, it actually happened. It was a really crazy story. I was supposed to write a monologue for a Rwandan actor who wanted to tell his adoption story. So that was the deal, and I'd never written for theater, so I was very excited. So I said, okay, let me try and write this story. So we were well into the process. We had the theater house, we had the dates, we had a title, we did promo, everything. But then he sort of chickened out at the very last minute. He decided, no, I'm not ready and I don't like this anymore. So there was this huge panic. And then the theater house, they just told me in November of 2019, they said, okay, so your premiere is planned on the 4th of February. We have this time. What do you want to make? Because you take the money, take the budget, go. And so that was crazy. But I had recently, like by accident, I saw on YouTube, there's this, Oprah Winfrey once did the Legends Ball, where she invited like all of these African-American women that inspired her. And I'd just seen that. And I just thought, very opportune, I was like, so I have all this money to do something. Why don't I just do like a Legends Ball and I'll invite every black woman that I know and that I want to connect to each other. So I just told them, and I think they were afraid to say no because they knew like we need a project. So 2 weeks later, we went to a house with 32 black women living in Flanders and Brussels. They all, because we invited 40 and 32 cleared their schedule to be there. So I knew from the moment that was happening, I knew, okay, I got something here. It might have started as like a silly idea. I felt like, okay, the need must be very high. So then on the first week, it was just 24 hours, like one night in a villa. And from the moment people started arriving, there was crying, there was hugging. Like within the first hour, we were talking about like generational trauma, and like, it was super great. Like, and I'm adopted too. Okay, so then we were all sitting together like, mixed race. Okay, me too. And so like it was such a powerful thing that I didn't know how much we needed that. Or how intense that would be, because it wasn't always. We had discussions there, and I told them like I'm putting a podcast mic on the dinner table, so when we're sitting down on the table, that's where you're being recorded, and I put a camera in a little room, and I said if you have any thoughts, just tell the camera, and those are the only things I'll use in the eventual play. I ended up with, I think, 9 hours of footage of people just ranting and telling me their deepest, darkest. Secrets into that mic. So writing that play was so easy because it was crazy because it's 32 different women, but the experience were all the same. And one of the things, because I had this very stupid maybe or naive thought in my head of what we would be discussing or what it would look like a sort of romanticized idea almost. I was like, okay, so we're gonna be braiding each other's hair, and so none of that happened. And I thought like, yeah, we were gonna be like sisters for life. None of that happened either. there were tensions, but it was so powerful. So then I wrote the play. I decided not to use. I hardly used any of that footage because it felt so personal, and I didn't want, because I knew the theater world in Belgium, it's gonna be a lot of white audiences, and this is not it's not their story to just absorb. So I switched it around a little bit, but one of the things that one of the women said to the camera was, they were sitting there together, and she said, imagine if we did this when we were younger. So then at the premiere, I was talking to the youth theater, be like, okay, we have to do this so I did a similar thing, but more organized and of course with more time, with teenage black girls. So that's the second play. So I think I kind of stumbled into it, but what I like, because normally I would say I'm trying to sort of get away from the very only about identity or repeating the story, but to me, the black female experience in Flanders, especially, it's a giant unknown. It's something that there's hardly any books, if you count me out, there's hardly any books on it. There's so little. It's really an untold story. It's a million untold stories. And so I'm happy that because I'm gonna do a part 3 and then it's done with 60-plus-year-olds, because I wanted to have all the generations, and they're like the first generation, so it's a different story. But I felt like it almost became a mission to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And it's very necessary, of course, as you say, to tell these kinds of stories. But it's also maybe a risk, and I'm getting back to what you said before, Dalilla, to ask Jessica too. I mean, when I walk in a bookshop, what I especially the last few years, I see more and more books or work by by diverse writers or authors, but almost all of them deal explicitly with what it's like to be a minority. So how do we evolve to a landscape where, for example, LGBTQ authors can write and want to write about non-LGBTQ stuff per se? Is it possible in the foreseeable future, and how do we do it?
I hope so. I mean, I think this is where we are now. I don't think there's any guarantee. Like, you can't be complacent about especially this issue, because otherwise it isn't gonna change. And I actually think that's possibly where I see my role as an agent as being kind of the most important, because I'm the one who's there, like with the writer, like in the beginning when they're first, I don't know, thinking of what they want to write next, or showing me an early draft of something. And what I always am hearing back, like from my writers, is we want to be able to write about anything, or we don't want to be pigeonholed into only writing about race or only writing about identity. And so whatever I can do to encourage them to produce the works that are going to convince publishers to publish them. That's where I am. But it's very hard because, and I think it's not only the publisher's fault. I think it has a lot to do with the world, and the issue, the things that keep happening and the things that are in the media that are so political and need to be confronted constantly. I mean, I do think it's unfair that it's the people, the writers of color or LGBT, who are always being pushed into the front lines of that and being made to confront it, whether it's in the talks that you're asked to give, or the books that you're expected to write, or especially the articles that you're expected to write around a book. And so all these things, I think, need to be constantly sort of pushed back against, however you can.
And I also feel like this is just a side thought that I always have when people ask me that question, or when we discuss this topic. It's also that even when we don't write about race or about identity, but we write about Black people, it will be interpreted as such. Because most white people or white men write from the perspective of a white man. So they're doing the same thing, but they're not being seen in that light. So I also feel like sometimes it's a little bit distorted how we judge because I wrote a book, they called it a thriller, but I'll say it's more of a novel. It's about murder, it's about couples, it's about love, it's about a lot of things, but because the main character is, because something happens that has to do with race, it becomes racialized. And I don't think we always fairly judge that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. Ébissé, are you worried, or do you think about the audience for Dipsaus? That it's only listened to by.
No, I mean, I think it's. Let me put it this way: we have the podcast Dipsaus, and then we have the where we publish. We had we haven't been publishing a lot now, but we publish articles, essays on our website, and then we have the book side of things. I think when we are recording our podcast, we do not think of who the audience is, because we know who our audience is, and if anybody else listens and they feel in any kind of way, I'm because I mean, you have. Whether it's radio or television, you have a certain type of audience that you cater to. But when we have guests on the podcast, we do take into account that the things that they say in a safe environment might be used against them. So that's what we do edit to protect guests. But in that way, we don't really. We just talk about what we want to talk about. But it's different when you're working with writers. I think as an editor, you always have to protect your writer, also as a literary agent. So if one of my writers said something or wrote something which I think might be, which might, cause a lot of drama, even if it's just, I would always ask, hey, are you ready to deal with the backlash?
Yeah. Because it has such a huge effect.
Yeah, definitely. You need to protect you're working with people, so you don't know what kind of damage they might get.
But it's not really our responsibility to educate an audience or to try to
okay, I think I understand your question. When I'm editing, it is one thing that we also did when we were editing Afrolit, the second the sequel to Zwart. Basically, we can call it a sequel to Zwart. Is there going to be a prequel? We're going to have a Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of thing.
Things are brewing.
Yeah, we did tell. Also, it has to do with, I think, again, we're talking about continental Europe. We're not talking about the UK and the US. They are so much, like the progress there is. We're 50 years behind. So usually people of color, or not just people of color, like marginalized groups have been taught to always explain themselves to the majority. Who are you? What do you mean? Explain everything. If there's a word they don't understand, you have to translate it. And one thing that I always tell my authors, like, I don't need explanation. You don't have to explain who you are. Just write what you want to write. And if somebody doesn't understand, they'll Google it. Nowadays you have Google. And this was a pet peeve of mine because I grew up in Ethiopia. I was 14 when I came to the Netherlands. I didn't know the language. I didn't know German. I had like limited knowledge of French, which I had French lessons in the. So when you read a random intellectual essay in Dutch, there's always German words in it and French words, and they're not translated. They expect you to know that. Nobody. So what I did was like I just before there was Google, you get a dictionary or you ask people. But so now, especially in the Netherlands, if you have a large diaspora from Afro-Caribbean diaspora, which was a colony of the Netherlands, and they use certain words, editors always ask them to translate it. And that's something that that's like, I tell them like, just don't. So when we were editing Afrolit, I said, no, we're not translating anything into Dutch. If they don't understand, then they don't understand.
But that is maybe educating the majority to a certain extent, but in a different way than we're used to. Yeah.
But a lot of beginning writers who just started out, they're afraid, so they feel the need to explain everything as well. And I don't think, and that is for me also not interesting work in that way. But like, who are you to? If you always have a white audience in front of you while you're writing, then you're not addressing me either. No. So you have to unlearn to just explain yourself all the time.
Yeah, you have to actively unlearn, because I feel like I'm still in that process. Yeah. Like every time I write, I still have to like reread it and think, who am I talking to? And sometimes I even like physically imagine someone to help me, not because it's instilled in us to think that way, and also because of like you said, backlash and stuff, you sort of calculate, okay, so what are they gonna think about? But and you taught me a lot in that respect, so just don't do it, because I do feel like once I stopped doing that so much, my audience became more diverse too. Because at first I had an all-white audience that was just so thankful that someone was explaining why the blacks were angry. Like that's a little bit what my role was. And now it's like, and even like close friends of mine, black friends, will tell me like, I never read your books because that, like, it's just you explaining to white people. And now they're starting to read them, and the judgment is a little bit less harsh, but it does help, like being more in charge, like it's the title of the panel, being more in charge of the storytelling also means getting a more diverse audience, because it's more relatable to people, and you can feel it when someone is writing for you. And
in addition to that, I also think like, I don't know, I can only speak for Dutch publishing industry. I also think like the gatekeepers also have a low opinion of their readers. That because people who read literature, people who buy literature and who buy nonfiction already have a certain degree of curiosity anyway. So why would you have to dumb down everything? Because you as an editor don't understand doesn't necessarily mean that your reader would not be interested. That's how I feel as well.
All right. I have a few more questions lined up, but since we're almost out of time, let's check. Let's see if there are any questions from the audience.
I don't really have a question, but I want to thank you for this panel. I live in Germany, and I did a similar panel or a conference at a theater about the German canon. Literary canon, so translation, publication, children's books as well, and. Sad to say, you guys are saying something we're going through over there.
There was a festival, like the Afro-German literary festival, like a few weeks ago as well. Well, one of my friends attended.
Yeah, where? I did one in class as well in Austria, but...
Yeah, I don't know where it was. I think Sharon was the one who organized it. Yeah. I wanted to go, but then I don't know any German, so I told her, like, I'm very happy for you, but I can't attend.
But you have the dictionary, no?
But everything was in German. I don't speak German.
I'm joking.
But yeah, so anyways, it's a similar struggle there. I'm actually not from Germany, but I've been living there for 9 years. And I also saw this, I think Germany, I want to say, is one of the largest countries where they do translation. So all the black stories are from America and the US, and it's shocking for me when I go to a bookstore and I see no one's talking about Afro-German experience, or it's a very limited kind of...
And there is a large Afro-German...
It's beyond disrespected in that country, right? But also, when you guys touched on about how there's some key hires in the US and the UK, and we had one also in Berlin, and in a culturally developed place, I don't see it as actually a step up, to be honest, because it's extremely alienating and isolating and toxic environment where you get institutionalized. I know for myself working in institutions how it was just torn me apart, you know. The only so these questions are always posed, like how can we diversify? It's not enough for one person, as you're saying, like it has to be on every single level of these institutions, that agents, editors, etc., everybody has to have a diverse board to be able to tell these stories in more than one lens, you know. But I'm happy to see there's some activists here and doing it. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, very good points. I have one there, and then.
I have a question for Dalilla. A few years ago, there was a documentary made by a Pakistani Norwegian director who went to the US to, let's say, red state, Republican states.
Yes.
And it's called Meeting the Enemy.
Okay.
And at the end of the film, she asks some of the people she interviews, do you realize that what I stand for is exactly the kind of people you don't like? And the people would say, yeah, but now I know you. You are different. So the question I have is, here in Belgium, for people like the mayor of Antwerp, what kind of exercise do you think would have to be done so that he's at least a crack in his view of, right and left?
I think the person that you're referring to now, I don't think we can crack him. But I think I can answer in a more. Maybe go back a little bit. When I was still being like a very opinionated activist writer, I actually had a lot of conversations with people that sent me hate mail, and with really like deeply racist people. I had a ton of conversations, and good ones, which is weird because it's a very strange dynamic. Usually, for example, someone would send me something threatening and I would reply with, "You're scaring me and I'm a mom of 3 kids, so why don't we just have a conversation," for example. The first thing, 90% of the time, the first thing people will say is, "I'm sorry." Because they forget that you're a human being with feelings. It's that simple. And then when you explain and you have more of a conversation, I actually got like, from I want to kill you to, well, best of luck in your struggle. Very strange. Or like people that wanted to be my friend afterwards. I'm like, no, that's not what this is. But just to I think, and that's maybe why I've been so adamant about representation and about how angry it makes me that we don't have it. Is because I feel, okay, you can't have one-on-one conversations with everyone. You can't have one-on-one conversations with everyone who is closed-minded, of course not. But telling a story is also sort of like having a conversation. So for example, if the media was way more diverse and people could see all of these stories, I don't think it's like a magical solution, but I think it would help. And we've seen it happening when there's, when you have documentaries about, let's say, refugees. it's on prime time and it's on like it's easily accessible, and a lot of these people that wouldn't usually see these stories see those stories. It's a little drop in the back of their heads. So it's a little crack, I feel, and that's why it angers me so much that we're not even trying to make these little cracks. But as for the mayor of Antwerp, I think that's a lost cause. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for this panel. It was incredible, and it was also traumatic for me. I'm sorry. No, in a good way, because this is also what I'm facing, right? I'm based in Sweden. I've been here. Oh my God. No, there we go. Yeah. So yes, and it's been, even the book I have now, the book before that, was published in many languages except Swedish, even though it talks about that. And then this book as well, the publishing industry is like trying to push it, where it highlights the Black experience from different lenses in Sweden. And because they can control the narrative, because the PR machine is strong, that's kind of the struggle I'm having right now. So all what you're saying, I really connect with it, because yes, even though I've lived in the US, I'm an American, I'm also living in Sweden, and I'm trying to tell more of the stories from the Nordics. There aren't that many. And you're fluent in the language. Also, if it's not romance, but there's no a lot of contemporary, just fiction about what's the Black experience like in the Nordics. I haven't read any.
No, but that's interesting that you say, because I do know some of the Swedish publishers are my friends, so maybe we should have this conversation. I'll tell you who it is.
They love to translate everybody else.
That's what I'm saying. I know, and these two publishers that I know personally, one of them published it. Okay, not naming names because it's easy to know who I'm talking about. But it's similar. I mean, when I have this conversation, what they say is like, yeah, but these issues are not relevant in Sweden. I mean, come on. That's what the Swedish say. That's what the Norwegians say. That's what the Danish say as well. Like, it's not our issue, because we don't have a colonial. But there's a large refugee diaspora in Sweden, from Ethiopia, from Somalia, from East Africa.
Yes, absolutely. And it's and when you say that we don't have this issue, it says I don't see you, I do not acknowledge you, and bad things happen somewhere else. So it's a conversation that it's like it's progressing in the US, UK, and then continental, and then slowly, because the Nordics is with you.
Yes, the situation is also similar in Germany. It's true. It's slowly changing, but for like a large country, I mean, it's one of the largest in the publishing world. The books that come out of Germany is quite large, but there's little to know. And that's what I mean. I was, because living in the Netherlands, not really finding any kind of representation, and I'm speaking specifically about the African continental representation in the Netherlands. I just started reading UK and US writers. That's what I did, and African writers as well in English. But then once I became a publisher, that's when I started being interested in what's happening on the continent. Because we have a lot in common, whether it's with Belgium or France or Germany, and there is one language that connects us, which almost everyone speaks a little bit of English. But I do think it's interesting to have these connections with each other and have these conversations take place in whatever form. That's what I love about this festival, that it brings together all these. Because as much as I love my UK, US writers, the podium for UK and US writing is huge. It's very dominating, and so Black Europe has taken a back seat. I find
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, on this note, okay, one last question, maybe short.
So thank you very much for the panelists. It was very interesting discussion, and I think it's very needed. And as one of the panelists also said, in a very diverse society, even though maybe at times we don't really want to accept it. I just had a question regarding social media. Do you think, as a diverse writer or an activist, this is something that's a hindrance, or it's a very useful tool for a diverse writer in a way to break through this?
Well, it's both, I think. I think without social media, I wouldn't have been able to write my first book, and because I think I sort of got a little bit known overnight because an open letter that I wrote went viral on social media in 2014 before viral was really a thing. So I can't say that it hasn't helped me, but the influx of negativity that comes from it has also been very damaging to my creativity, but to my mental health. And so I think it's difficult to say. I wish that I could view my social media as something that is fun and that I play with and that I share my life on, but I have to view it as like a way to prove to publishers, let's say, to prove that I'm relevant or that people. Yeah. So it has become this tool that I have to use when I don't necessarily always want to use it. So I think it's dangerous if we all think, but nowadays if you're really good, you can just put your stuff on social media and then it will be picked up, because that's putting so much work that isn't creative work. That's putting marketing and everything on the shoulders of creatives. And I think that shouldn't be their job. There's people that get paid to do those things. So and you can see, like, even it's comparable to what's happening in the music industry and stuff. Like they're almost expecting you to have a big following or to be controversial or to respond to everything on social media, because it's like the best tool to get the news out there. While I don't think that should be, my personal social media shouldn't be that big of an influence on my work. So it's the knife cuts both ways. So.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, it has helped, social media has helped marginalized voices get your voice out there, but there's also, the downside is that the amount of hate you get is just overwhelming. And also, especially in the literary world, not necessarily non-fiction, but in the literary world, there's also, if you're a white writer, you don't have to have a social media presence to so you see, they have an unfair advantage, because if you have walked the road well traveled for white literary writers, where you follow certain studies, then you send in your story somewhere, it gets published, somebody else picks it up, you go to certain literary festivals, and then you get picked up. You don't have to have a social media presence. Whereas if you are a non-white writer, the first thing that was like, is that person famous or not? How many followers do you have? That becomes, and it's not fair.
A huge imbalance.
I don't think it's, there's a huge imbalance.
All right, I'm afraid we're out of time. I want to thank these three lovely people. Jessica Craig.
Thank you.
So, Jessica Craig, Ébissé Wakjira-Rouw, and Dalilla Hermans. And of course, I want to thank all of you for being here. Thanks so much for taking the time. I want to remind you that the festival program continues at Molière Theatre in Brussels. And there's still today and tomorrow, I think, left at the festival. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.